I wanted to run this by you guys just to see what you think. I love numbers, and I've been crunching a few numbers around rough sleeping numbers in the country. And for me, I think I've come up with something which I haven't seen been explored before anywhere else. For me, it provides a very obvious route to actually tackling rough sleeping effectively. And now I know there's loads of different schemes and ideas and initiatives that go on around rough sleeping. I know the government's basically promised that it was going to end rough sleeping for nearly a decade now, and it's still not happened. And there's lots and lots of money being pumped around the homelessness sector, and lots of things have been done, a lot of noise has been made. And let's face it, rough sleeping is still a big issue here. So for me, what I'm suggesting, or what I think these stats actually suggest, is that there is a different way to work. And actually, you don't need to wait for anyone else to kind of get on board with what you're doing. You can just push ahead and make these changes in your local areas. So what I'm going to show you in a second is a series of graphs that compares these two numbers. And I'll give a bit of background on the numbers so they actually make sense. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm comparing the number of single people in temporary accommodation in different districts and across England, and the number of people recorded as having slept rough in it on a typical night who have recourse to public funds. Now, you might be familiar with both those statistics. Both of those statistics are from the government website, so I'm not making this stuff up. But there's a few things you need to know about both to actually make sense. And the first thing is that the government doesn't publish stats on the number of single people in temporary accommodation. But what it does do is it publishes the total number of households in temporary accommodation, and it states how many of them are families with children and families with pregnant people, or pregnant single people potentially. And essentially, if you're familiar with priority need, you'll notice that those are the two biggest automatic priority need characteristics. And so essentially what I've done is I've subtracted the number of families with children and pregnant women from the total figure, and I've arrived at what is a very good proxy for the number of single people. And that's important because single people are effectively going to be people who have to show that they're vulnerable in order to get housed under the Housing Act, rather than it being an automatic criteria. And obviously many people rough sleeping will be in that criteria. Unless they're pregnant, they're going to have to show that they're vulnerable if they're going to show that they're in priority needs. And I'm going to say this again at the end, but if you can't show that someone who is rough sleeping is in priority need, you're probably not doing your job very well, because the vast majority of people who end up rough sleeping will be affected by multiple issues that make their life much more difficult. Lots of impairments potentially that are going to make it difficult to find accommodation and deal with not being housed without harmful effects, which is effectively the legal test. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on here. And with the rough sleeper numbers, I'm not just looking at the total numbers, I'm basically separating out those who do have recourse to public funds from those who don't, because obviously the solution to homelessness for both those different groups will be quite different a lot of the time, because if you don't have recourse, often you can't get housing benefit, therefore you're going to be very limited in your housing options. Whereas if you have recourse to public funds, as I say, it's highly likely you're going to be in priority need, therefore you should be able to get assistance from the local council when it comes to getting temporary accommodation. So I was only able to find stats on the rough sleeping numbers with recourse going back to 2016. I did have a good look for it. If anyone knows where else the stats might be, let me know. But as I say, I'm not just looking at the total numbers, I'm looking at the numbers who have recourse, just because otherwise it doesn't make sense. You know, we're looking at single people who go into TA. People without recourse to public funds don't go into TA under section 188 or section 190 or section 193 or whatever. So that's kind of why I'm doing this. Now, if we go to England, I'm going to, as I say, show a series of graphs. There's various bits of information on there. In each graph, the orange line is the number of single people in temporary accommodation, and the blue line is the number of people rough sleeping who have recourse to public funds. And again, I haven't said it yet, the rough sleeping stat is highly politicised. Some of it's, some local authorities produce absolute nonsense figures. So for example, some London councils are basically posting that they have 2 rough sleepers, and I just don't believe it. You know, central London, I would expect those numbers to be scores of people, if not hundreds. And you know, and actually councils will sometimes exaggerate figures as well. So I've seen that as well, where essentially because they know funding is going to be available for those areas with higher numbers, they will exaggerate those figures. So it's kind of less exact than the TA numbers, but still, I think if you take an average and look at the average trends, you're going to find something which is, you know, half useful anyway. So this is England. As I say, orange is the single people in TA and the blue is the rough sleepers with recourse. And you'll see in England from 2016, so these are autumn figures every year because that's when the rough sleeper count's done. You're starting off at just over 15,000 single people in TA across the whole of the country, and that has gone up to just under 40,000, so whatever increase that is, about 150% increase or something. And the number of people recorded sleeping rough with recourse has gone down from about 3,000. It went down to a low point when COVID was happening, and it's started to creep up again afterwards. And again, it's just probably worth, you know, stating the obvious here. the fact that COVID happens in this period has a big impact on the figures, and it's another variable that we have to factor in, because some councils would have dealt with COVID by offering Section 188 accommodation, and therefore the figures would be recorded, whereas other areas would have used hotels and other kind of informal arrangements to deal with everyone in, as Bedford did. Bedford's where I live, so Bedford basically took over a hotel or half a hotel, and basically those people were not recorded as being in temporary accommodation for the purposes of the government stats, as far as I know anyway. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. So anyway, England's done that. So far, you know, if you're looking carefully, you might see a bit of a correlation. So in one sense, as the figures are going up, the steepest is single people in TA. The rough sleeper figures are dropping at their steepest as well, but you can't see it very well here. But what I've actually done instead, just to kind of demonstrate this, is basically show here where we've got the same graph, the same kind of period, but I've multiplied the number of people rough sleeping by 7, and that number 7 is important. I'm going to come back to that. And if we do that, then what we've got with that green line there is we can see it very nicely mirrors, or there's a very nice symmetry between the single people in TA and the number of people who are rough sleeping who do have recourse. And you can kind of dissect it with this blue line here, which you'll notice it kind of goes up a little bit at the end, or whichever way, I don't know which way you're looking at it, so that way or whatever. So there's a bit of an increase there, and I think that's a representation of the fact that the overall strain on the system is getting higher. So there's the kind of a natural increase that it would actually be the baseline. And just to kind of reiterate this, when the numbers of single people in TA are going up the fastest, that's when the rough sleeper numbers are coming down the fastest. So yeah, as I say, that's kind of what we're talking about. I'm going to come back to say a little bit more about this at the end. But then if we just fly through a whole bunch of graphs from individual districts, you can see the same sort of pattern emerging, although because it's kind of, you know, a smaller control group, it's kind of, you know, it's maybe a little bit messier. So Ashford here, and again you'll notice I've got the population of the district and then the percentage change in temporary accommodation and rough sleeping. So again, you've got the same idea, you know, rough sleeping numbers start off higher than the single people in TA. And then the single people in TA have gone up over this period, and rough sleeper numbers have gone down. They have crept up a little bit at the end, and you'll notice that the single people in TA has dropped down a little bit at the end as well. So again, I'm not going to kind of go into too much detail on these, but I'm just going to flash them up on the screen. Basildon, Basingstoke and Dean, that's a really good one, again, just kind of for having that symmetry, although this is a bit of an outlier because both the total numbers have gone down in this period, and I don't know enough about Basingstoke to kind of know what's really going on there. You can still see that correlation between people in TA going up and rough sleeper numbers coming down, and vice versa. Bedford is an outlier, which I'll show you later. It still shows the same pattern actually, but the number of single people in Bedford has gone up more than anywhere else I'm aware of in the country, and I'll talk more about that later. But essentially there's a significant role that Just Us, the charity I set up with John Allen, I used to work for them, had in that, because we were challenging gatekeeping and we were challenging bad non-priority decisions as well, which has kind of resulted in this huge increase. So as I say, I've got more to say about Bedford, which I'll come back to. Blackpool, again, you've kind of got the same idea. You've got a large increase when COVID happened, and again that kind of dropped down rough sleeper numbers a little bit. So again, you can kind of see the same symmetry. A lot that Cambridge shows it quite nicely. Canterbury the same. You know, again you can kind of see where, you know, between 2019 and 2020, single people in TA went up and rough sleeper numbers came down faster than any other period. So that's again just good correlation there. Chichester is quite a nice one. Cornwall again quite a nice one. You'll notice again, you know, the kind of figures are creeping up at the end of rough sleepers, and I think, again, go back to that England graph, it's because the actual baseline, the total number of people in the system is also going up, so it's not a closed system in that sense. Eastleigh, Gloucester, Guildford, Harlow, again, you know, I'm just going to flash them up on the screen just in case I get your area. You know, again, Hull kind of demonstrates that quite nicely, but again, you've got a big increase in the number of people sleeping rough then. I don't know quite what's going on in Hull to kind of to make that happen. If anyone's from Hull, you might be able to let me know. Ipswich, again, good correlation. Same with Leeds. Luton. Luton's an interesting one, so you kind of see quite a big drop there in the number of single people in TA, and it's only led to a kind of a fairly modest increase in the number of rough sleepers. So again, you know, I don't know why that might be. Part of it might just be the fact that the rough sleeper figures aren't being recorded accurately, or it could be other things as well that I haven't really considered. Maidstone, Medway, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Newham. As I say, Newham doesn't really show a lot from the graph because they're saying they only have 2 people rough sleeping who have recourse to public funds. I struggle to believe that, if I'm honest. Nottingham, again, same sort of idea. Overall increase in single people in TA, and rough sleeper numbers are sort of staying low, although they are also creeping up at the end. And again, I think that's because that baseline is increasing. Westminster, again, is obviously quite an outlier in terms of it being often, regarded as the highest number of rough sleepers in the country. And also you've got, more than 1,500 single people in TA, which is, I think might be the highest number I've seen anywhere. Plymouth, same sort of idea again. At the end here we've got a drop in single people in TA, and that's when the rough sleeper numbers are increasing the fastest. Preston, again, there's good symmetry there. Reading, again, same thing. Salford, yep, same. Southend, Southwark, again, doesn't really demonstrate it. They're putting very low rough sleeper numbers out there, and in fact they've got more single people in TA than Westminster did. Stockport, again, there's a correlation there. Tameside, again. Thanet, yep. Warrington does a nice job of showing it. And then again Westminster, which I seem to have put in there twice. So in Wiltshire, finally Wiltshire there, again, that kind of demonstrates it quite nicely. Now if we go back, these are the stats. I'm hoping that's of interest in itself, which you can obviously pause and kind of see a bit more detail. I didn't choose them at random. They're just kind of places that I either have done training there, so I know the services a little bit, or I have friends or whatever who live there, or places like Westminster, which are just interesting places anyway when it comes to rough sleeping. But if we go back to this graph of England, where I've kind of multiplied the number of rough sleepers by 7 to get this symmetry, what that number 7 means is that essentially what I'm saying, and this is my hypothesis, if you want to reduce your rough sleeper numbers down by 10, you need to house 70 people, single people in TA. And first of all, I know a lot of people would say to me, "Oh, Mike, you obviously don't know what you're talking about, because these people, they can't possibly manage TA." And you're absolutely right. In the current TA conditions that councils offer, which are absolute shitholes, which have got loads of ASB going on, loads of drug dealing, then you are potentially setting people up to fail. But just to point out, councils have a legal obligation to provide suitable temporary accommodation, and those sorts of facilities, those sorts of accommodations are not in any way suitable, and you can absolutely challenge them on it. Bedford, we've done that. It's one of the things we've gone after them. They are now investing tens of millions of pounds in buying their own decent quality TA. So it can be done. You can't just kind of look around and say, "Oh, this is all terrible." You just need to get down your local council and start challenging them. So what you need to do is you need to get all this, increase the number of single people in TA, and it's not that necessarily is going to meet the needs of everyone who is currently rough sleeping, but what you are effectively doing is you're providing a decent safety net, because those people who rough sleep, they haven't just kind of magically appeared. They will have often got there because they basically crashed through all of the safety barriers that should have been there for them, or the safety nets weren't there in the first place. And so what I'm saying is, if you house 70 additional people, single people in TA, you are protecting that group from falling through the net and end up rough sleeping, and then kind of getting into all sorts of additional issues and different difficulties that they're going to face. So that's what I'm really talking about. So in order to kind of do what I'm saying, you need to push up standards in your local temporary accommodation. And in my experience, you do that by challenging the state of the temporary accommodation directly. You don't try and compromise with local authorities or try and be nice about it. You just call them out when there's stuff which is terrible. And at the same time, you need to be pushing more people who might be rough sleeping or who are rough sleeping into temporary accommodation. And you do that by doing good casework, showing that they're in priority need, challenging bad decisions, complaining when people are gatekept. That is the sort of thing you can do. And again, you don't need to wait for the local homelessness partnership to agree with you to start doing that. You can just do it now. It only takes a couple of people to do it. Money is spent on initiatives that simply don't work. These rough sleeper multi-agency panels, which are illegal, by the way, because of data breaches. You're basically having meetings about people who don't even know they're happening, and they're not involved in the meetings about themselves. That's nuts. That's not only illegal, it's just stupid. You've also got the verification of rough sleepers when actually people should be housed in temporary accommodation, which again would be unlawful. So you just need to crash through these stupid initiatives that are widely accepted. They're put out by the big charities and so on, by DLUC. Just ignore them. It acts as if they don't exist. In Bedford, we just let the homelessness sector get on doing what they were doing, and we just focused on getting people housed using the law, and it's resulted in a lot of remarkable things. So if you think, go back to that graph of Bedford, there's over 450 single people in TA now. That that leads to the next problem, which is making sure there's enough long-term suitable accommodation for them to move into. But it's a good problem to have, because those people are not at risk of rough sleeping. They're not going to be kind of getting worse. They're not going to be suffering the effects of street homelessness, and that is going to provide some protection from them in terms of moving on. And we've never met most of those people, you know. By getting a small number of people sorted out and getting compensation for them, and kind of, you know, showing that there's outrageous things happening, will be enough to push up services in your area. Having said all that, the closer to London you are, the harder that will be, so I fully acknowledge that. But equally, on that note, if you're working in areas which are well away from London, where they don't have the same pressures on housing, it makes it dead easy to actually go after them, particularly where they're legal aid deserts, and councils are just not used to being challenged robustly. So you can do a lot of good with this stuff, basically. So yeah, as I say, I'm hoping that's interesting, even if you disagree with what I'm saying strongly. Be really interested to hear what you've got to say in the comments. As I say, overall what I'm saying is, if you want to stop rough sleeping, get more people into temporary accommodation, and do that by basically making decent quality homeless applications, and at the same time push up the quality of temporary accommodation that the council's actually offering. If you do those two things, you'll keep rough sleeping numbers very low. And yes, you're always going to have one or two people who, you know, they're just they're very unique, and they've kind of got a very unique set of challenges to deal with. But for most people, they will do absolutely fine now. And as I say, I work with a number of people who have just impressed me again and again. They were supposed to be unhousable, you know, arson convictions, polysubstance misuse, DVTs in both legs, all these sorts of things. They were on the very, you know, edge of existence, the very edge of their life, and yet when they got given decent quality temporary accommodation, they have not become homeless ever again since, and they needed very little support in those services. And so actually the final thing I would say is, I love the idea of psychological informed environments. I love the idea of trauma informed stuff. And I absolutely acknowledge that if you get someone with, you know, multiple issues into a home, it doesn't magically make all those issues go away. And so there would definitely be a really good opportunity to support people in temporary accommodation and kind of help with all those different things. I'm not saying you need it all the time. I actually disagree with the element of Housing First that says people need intense support, because I just don't believe it in the way that the Housing First model puts out. But yeah, there would definitely be opportunities to actually help people in that process, as we saw with Just Us. You know, we did some really great work there. We, you know, helped people get furniture and kind of get the house kitted out, help with transport, and in the midst of fighting for them, and kind of, you know, I remember just fitting the carpet with one guy who'd been homeless for 16 years, and he's never been homeless since. You know, this was a guy who kind of, you know, all over the country, going to different hostels. We just got him housed using the law, and he's not become homeless since. And so those kind of those relationships you build with people, and the kind of various things you can do around those relationships and that community, actually is all good stuff that just happens naturally if you're fighting for people and you're making sure people are dealt with properly.